moving here, the culture shock was an understatement. I was expected to work, I was expected to speak up and be on all the time. And so I got my first job in McDonald's, working at the till. And I remember my first day, you had to stand at the till and scream, "Can I help, please?" Which was ridiculous. And let me just say, being overstimulated while a customer is yelling at you is not the most fun experience, especially as an introvert. And then came university. Presentations, group work, having to put myself out there. I felt like I was adapting to a world that didn't really pause for people like me, but then I had to keep showing up in that world. And then came my first job as a business analyst. And then the culture hit me again. After work drinks, networking events, coffee catch-ups during lunchtime. And again, I started to feel like I had to always paint this picture or wear a mask like an introvert. But then, after a full day of meetings and collaborating at work, the last thing I wanted to do was go to after-work drinks. I just wanted to go home, take a deep breath, relax, light a candle, and just be in my own space. But then, it's in these sort of environments that the connections were made, promotions whispered, and I felt like I had to be in these social spaces. And I started to also feel like if you weren't an introvert, you weren't going to grow in the workplace. And again, for a long time, I internalized that. I would push myself to show up in ways that didn't come naturally to me. And then I realized I don't have to out extrovert and extrovert. I just have to find a way to work in a natural way for myself. And so at this point, you might be wondering, so what exactly is an introvert? Is it someone who is antisocial, someone who is shy, or someone who is quiet? All these things might be running through your mind. But according to Susan Cain, who is an author of the book titled Quiet, introversion and extroversion is really about where your energy comes from and where it gets drained. Introverts tend to feel more alive in quieter environments. We tend to think before we speak. And we also tend to process things internally first before we then share them outwardly. Extroverts, on the other hand, they recharge in groups. They tend to thrive on stimulation, and they tend to also think while speaking. And they draw energy from interaction as well. Neither of them is better, they're just different. Okay. So I just wanted to say another problem is that the workplace wasn't exactly built for introverts. It's built on open plan offices, brainstorming sessions, networking. And again, as an introvert, I end up feeling like I'm playing someone else's game. And just to be clear, introversion exists on a spectrum, right? You could be highly introverted or you could be an ambivert. So it depends on, you can find yourself on a different level of the spectrum, depending on the situation, the scenario, your mood, or the company that you're in. But the point that I'm trying to make is that we need to make space for all types of energy in our teams, in the workplace, especially in the change world like business analysis. But the thing that no one really talks about is introverts are incredible thinkers, incredible listeners, and incredible observers. And then when we do speak, we tend to land with clarity. And that's because we've thought it through. So I just wanted to invite you to check in with yourself here. Do you recharge alone or around people? Do you prefer writing out your thoughts first before saying them out loud? And do you sometimes feel like your ideas come after the meeting ends? I find that happens to me a lot as an introvert. And if you can relate with these as well, you might be more introverted than you think. And I just wanted to remind you that it's not a flaw, it's a strength. And you probably just haven't been taught how to use it yet. So are there any introverts in the room? Or anyone who's worked with introverts? That would be all of us. So I want you to take some time and just think what words come to mind when you think of the word introvert. How many of those words are strengths? How many are assumptions? And if you're introverted, how have you sort of adapted to a world that seems to celebrate extroversion over introversion? And how has that sort of made you change the way you work as a business analyst? Would anybody like to share? No? Did you want to share?
Oh, no, I was thinking on that.
Okay.
I mean, I could say that, well, now I'm a blank thing. I feel that post-COVID and working from home has helped me in the workplace in the sense that I kind of don't have to interact with that many people on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So I don't feel that social hangover that I might get. I don't have to say no to the social outings. But I often think that I do get, I'm not around where what you described as promotion whispers, and I don't get that networking that perhaps extroverts. But for me, COVID and working from home has been a blessing. And having meetings and teams on a one-to-one basis for me has been godsend, I feel. I'm not sure those are that I answered your question.
Yes, definitely. Somebody else wants to.
For me, I think using technology does help. So like lady mentioned, using Teams, for instance, for your meetings does help because when you're sometimes in a physical space, like you said, if you're still processing your thoughts and there are people in the room that are louder, they tend to get the audience. But when you use technology, like you can put your hand out virtually, it gets to you, have a moment to speak. I find that has helped me.
Yeah.
And also I think as an introvert, believing in yourself as well, because if you kind of realize that you have something to give and you do bring something to the table, then that gives you a bit more boldness to speak out when you need to. So that's what's happening.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing.
Hi. I'm an introvert by heart as well. Just like you, as a student, I worked in hospitality as a waiter. And one of the lessons that I learned from that was to use connection and talking to people as a means to an end. Because if I talked more with my customers and entertain them more, I got bigger tips. So from that point onward and throughout my career, I've used connection as a purposeful tool, but it's always deliberate. And indeed, it takes energy, but at the end of the day, I can come home and read a book or be just on my own or journaling, and then I can recharge. But I choose my connections to achieve a purpose here, just like here, networking, meeting people, gaining new insights. It takes energy, but it also brings rewards.
It does. It does. Thank you for sharing. I think maybe one more person.
All right, hi. So growing up, also being identified as an introvert, one of the things my mom always pointed out that I had was curiosity. And it didn't strike me that curiosity would be a strength for an introvert until COVID happened. And then we had to work on Teams and have all those online meetings. And I'd been working in the team for quite a while before COVID hit. But once COVID hit and then new people started being added to the team, and then I see them on camera, there was a curiosity in my mind, how tall is this person? Do they really look like what they look like on camera? And so I found curiosity working for me, and then that kind of became my superpower, because when we now met in person, I found out I was a lot more chatty because I was trying to satisfy my curiosity, and just going after my curiosity kind of helps me as an introvert.
Yeah, that makes so much sense in terms of trying to imagine how tall someone is. I remember one time too, the first time I met my manager, I thought he was much shorter from the videos, but he's so tall. Oh my God. Okay, thank you all for sharing, by the way. So what words come to mind when you hear introverts? These sort of words: introspective, deep thinker, reflective, quiet, shy, calm. Some of these are true, and some might be assumptions, right? So introverts aren't necessarily shy. Some can be shy, but I think with preparation we can deliver better in our roles. So how do introverts work best? I think, in summary, introverts work best by just being prepared and having notice of things before we then show up. And these aren't limitations. They're design choices that help us to do our best work. The more we acknowledge and accommodate these, the stronger our outcomes will be as introverts. So after the turning point in my journey, I started noticing something. It's not just about how introverts show up, it's about how we're supported, especially in the workplace. Because even the most thoughtful, deep thinking, perceptive introverts can feel stuck in work environment that doesn't necessarily create the space for them to show up as they are. So I want to take a moment to talk about what I've learned through personal experience, observation, and conversations over the years about how managers and colleagues can actually support introverts in the workplace. Firstly, managers and colleagues could try and listen beyond words. Don't take quiet for disengaged. Some of the most tuned in people in the room are listening attentively. They aren't saying much, but try to give them room to process and reflect. And you'll often find a gold mine if you follow up one-to-one, or just give them time to process before responding. Advance notice. Give advance notice for group sessions, especially group sessions. Introverts tend to think before they speak. So if you want their ideas, try not to spring big decisions or questions on them in real time. send agendas ahead of meetings, share questions in advance, and also let them know that their inputs are valuable. Offer quiet input options, create varied ways for them to contribute. Not everyone can brainstorm out loud. Allow options such as post-it notes, breakout rooms, online boards, or quiet reflection time during workshops. This really helps us as introverts. And it levels the playing field and actually boosts the quality of input across the board. In terms of leadership, recognize different leadership styles. Leadership doesn't always look like the person with the loudest voice, right? Introverted leaders often lead by influence, consistency, and calm decision making, and try to promote those qualities too for leadership. And finally, reward insight, not just volume. Celebrate clarity. We tend to reward quick speakers, high energy, fast thinking, but in business analysis and change work in general, what really matters is the clarity, the empathy, and the insight. So try to make room for people who think deeply and speak meaningfully. So if you're a manager or someone working with introverts, I just want to say this gently. Introverts aren't trying to be difficult, I promise you, we're not. We're just playing a different instrument in the orchestra, and you just need to take time to listen. And you'll often find that it's what holds the whole piece together. So now I want to flip the lens a bit. Think about when you've worked with an introvert, right? Maybe quietly brilliant, maybe misunderstood. What did you learn from that person? Or what did you even misjudge at first? How did they surprise you? Or even frustrate you? Sometimes we make assumptions based on energy levels and visibility, but introverts have a way of teaching us things that we don't realize we need to learn. So the turning point for me in my career, for a long time, I saw my introversion as a limitation. In group settings, I was never the first to speak up. In meetings, I prefer to listen and take notes and reflect before actually contributing. And for a while, I thought that made me less confident, less visible, less of a leader. Especially in business analysis, which is such a people-heavy role, right? I questioned whether I was in the right career. And I told myself, no, I'm just getting by. Especially in the early stages of my BA career, I'd see other BAs who could take charge in meetings, lead workshops, and take up space with confidence. And I just would think to myself, I don't know how to do that. And then I thought maybe I just wasn't cut out for this. But the thing is, I wasn't actually doing a bad job because I got good feedback from my managers, which was surprising because I was there doubting myself. They would always say things like, you're a good listener, you actually ask questions that nobody else asked, you're approachable. Then, one day, I was chatting to a colleague of mine and we were just talking about work and our hobbies, things outside work. And he asked me, what is it you like about business analysis? And I paused, because I wasn't sure what to say. And so I responded, I was like, honestly, I don't really know. I don't think it's the right fit for me because it's very people heavy. And then we continued talking about our hobbies, and I used to teach yoga, so I got so excited and started talking about yoga, the practices, the positives and all that. And my face lit up, I sat up straight with so much passion. And then the next thing he asked was, you speak so much, you speak with so much passion about yoga. I wonder how it would look like if you brought that same spark to business analysis. And I was like, what? So that stayed with me for a while. And then I started to think, you know what? I wonder what it would be like if I actually started to embrace my job and take it as mine. You know, what if I stopped trying to mold myself as the loud BA or the networking BA and built a way of working that actually worked for me, a way that would make me light up. And then, so I realized I didn't have to change who I was. I just needed a better way to show up and to work. And then I asked myself that question, what if the quietest person in the room actually has the clearest insight? And what if I've been that person all along? And so that's where storytelling came in. So why does storytelling work for introverts? Storytelling really works for us because it plays on our strengths. It gives us a prepared way to speak up, and it also helps us connect with our audience emotionally. It lets us lead without having to compete for airtime, and it's our way of making change stick quietly but powerfully. So after years of trying to prove myself by being efficient and thorough, I realized something was missing. People didn't really feel the message. They didn't connect to the change, even when the evidence was right there. And that's when I started experimenting with storytelling. Not exactly big grand speeches, I mean just simple human stories that stakeholders could see themselves in. And then things started to shift for me. I saw that people listened, people connected, they leaned in. And for introverts like us, storytelling is like our microphone. It gives our voices strength to, again, connect with our audience. So let's talk about how I've used storytelling to create change in my BA work. One of my biggest wins in storytelling, it wasn't even something I planned. I was trying to explain how our systems handled orders that come through different channels. And honestly, the tech side of things can get quite confusing, especially for stakeholders who aren't in the tech space. And I could see that I was losing them. And so suddenly I said, you know, how when you go to McDonald's, I don't know if this is why I worked in McDonald's, but I said, you know how when you go to McDonald's, whether you order at the kiosk or the till or at the drive-through, your food still shows up at the right counter, and the system knows where it came from and it routes it accordingly. And as soon as I said that, I could see that their eyes lit up, they got it, and there was no confusion. And they even repeated the analogy back to me in other meetings. So why did that work? I think it worked because it connected an unfamiliar system with a familiar experience. It made them feel seen and heard. And it also made the logic stick. People remembered it later. One of my other favorite ways of using storytelling is when I'm explaining APIs, application programming interface. It sounds intimidating when you've never dealt with the word before. So I use the analogy. Imagine you're at a restaurant. You sit down, you open your menu, and you ordered pasta. And then the waiter takes the menu to the kitchen and to the chef. The chef prepares the food and brings, and then the waiter brings the food back to you. In that story, you are the user. The menu is the interface, the list of available services, The waiter is the API, the messenger that takes your request to the system in the kitchen and delivers the response. And then the chef is the backend system doing the work. So by using this simple scenario, the stakeholders not only understood the concept, they were able, again, to later explain it to team members without using a technical language. So for me as an introvert, this is a win. And it did work for me. Another one is in explaining the insurance term when it comes to submitting a claim or making a claim. The processes can seem complex when explaining this to non-technical people or people outside the insurance space. So I once had to explain why multiple systems and people are involved before a claim is paid to a client or a customer. But instead of listing each step in technical detail, I compared it to booking a holiday. So you book your flights, you maybe reserve your hotel room and maybe transfers, right? But behind the scenes, your travel agent is coordinating the airline, reserving the hotel, and liaising with the transfer suppliers. So if the hotel is full or the airline schedule changes, you don't really know what's going on in the back and forth of things. You just receive your updated itinerary. A claims handler works in the same way. They coordinate the policy validation, the fraud checks, the assessor reviews, the repair authorization, and the payment release to the customers so that it feels seamless for them. And for me, this analogy made the whole process click for my audience, and they started again reusing that same story in other sessions or other meetings. So that's the power of using a well-chosen everyday analogy. It transforms the complexity of things into something familiar, right? And as an introvert, it lets me have that influence without needing to be the loudest in the room. So how has storytelling benefited me as an introvert? The first benefit I've seen is more confidence in meetings. Before, I'd hesitate before I speak up. But now I frame my points into a story, just everyday experiences that I can relate with the point I'm trying to make. And it also gives me greater influence on decision making. So rather than just stating facts, it helps my audience to connect emotionally with what I'm saying. And that often sways the outcomes in a way that data alone doesn't. And what's more powerful for me is that the stakeholders actually remember and reuse the ideas, so I can see that I'm connecting with them and they actually understand what I'm trying to explain. And they can also see that I understand them. And perhaps most importantly, I feel that my voice is heard without being the loudest in the room. Storytelling allows me to leave an impact without competing with louder personalities. So one thing I want you to do today is think about one concept you know you need to explain this week. Maybe it's something in a meeting, maybe it's something in a project you're working on. Instead of overcomplicating it, pause and really observe how it works in practice. And then strip out the jargon, swap it for real life experience that people around you will recognize. And you'll find that that's the power of storytelling. It makes complex ideas stick because it then becomes relatable. Quiet voices, big impact. I just wanted to say, introversion isn't a limitation, right? It's just a different operating system. And some of the most influential stories we've ever heard came from people who preferred quiet. People like J.K. Rowling, Steven Spielberg, Barack Obama, Rosa Parks, Meryl Streep, and Susan Cain. All of them prove that storytelling doesn't belong to the loudest person in the room. It belongs to those who can connect in ways that matter. And so I want to leave you with a few takeaways from today's session. First, storytelling isn't just a nice to have skill. It can be one of the most useful tools for introverts, introvert business analysts, to make the complex simple and to also inspire change. Secondly, introverts have a natural strength that makes stories powerful. Our quiet strength, our approachability. Things like listening, noticing details that others miss, and taking time to reflect before speaking. These are huge assets in storytelling. Thirdly, using clear storytelling structure. It helps you to turn technical detail into a narrative that stakeholders actually understand, a narrative that stakeholders actually remember and care about. And adapting your story to the audience is what builds that connection with them. It also is what builds that trust and gets buy-in faster. A senior executive doesn't need the same level of detail as a developer, right? But both of them need a story that makes sense for them. So as BAs, because we bridge the gap, storytelling helps us to make our work better. And finally, you don't have to be an extrovert to lead change. You just need to show others the vision that you can see. And storytelling is what brings that vision to life. And so that brings me to the message I want to leave with you today. I just want to remind you that you don't have to change who you are to lead change. You just have to learn to tell the truth about what you see, and storytelling is how you do that. Stories are everywhere around us, right? We just have to think about the beginning, the middle, and the end. And that's the power of storytelling. Thank you. Open to feedback or questions, or if you'd like to share anything else around your experience as introverts. Oh, we have one person.
Something that I experienced, and you sort of picked up on some of your points, but I was the same in certain meetings, and everyone talked, and I sort of sat back, didn't contribute, questioned why I was there. And my mentor at the time said, so I picked up on the fact that I was going to stay back at the end of the meeting and cut through all the noise and summarise everything you had covered and kind of actions, and sort of take a lot of clarity out of what was a lot of kind of conversation and noise, and he sort of helped me see that there was a lot of value in that. And as soon as I realised that was valuable, then immediately you feel more welcome in meetings, and you put your place and things. Just sort of knowing that was helpful. So sort of thing that happened to me along the way.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
thank you. One thing I do is just a way of ensuring that you spot the introverts in the team and leverage that to ensure you carry them along. So what I do is, I know that some people, they have good ideas, they have bright ideas, but they don't want to speak. So you find a way to say, can we hear from you? Not putting them on the spot, but giving them the opportunity, to also present their ideas. So that's one way I do it to them.
Okay. I think that's a good way to do it. And but in my personal experience, when we're in like a group session and I'm called out, it feels like, oh, I'm being put on the spot. But yeah, it does help, especially in workshops, for instance, and you need the person to contribute. However, as VAs, we're very sort of attentive to emotion and body language. So for me, in workshop settings, sometimes I can already know who the introverts are, and rather than call them out, I would just maybe take their names down and then have one-to-one sessions with them to ask if there's anything they would have liked to share in the workshop. And that usually tends to help build that relationship with the stakeholder, especially as an introvert. Does anybody else want to share something?
So I think I learned more rather as a manager of someone who's introverted than being an introvert myself. And it's all the same challenge you highlighted, how you try and compare equitably between what people are doing, rather than perhaps the noise they're making or how loud they're making contribution, but the people who take it away, think about it and come back, and how you are almost balancing diversity of thought, diversity of approach in that same consistency to try and measure what outcomes are, and that really reflects on me much more than going through some of those same things myself as well.
Yeah. And do you find that you tend to sort of, because you're also an introvert and then managing introverts, you find that easier to identify and manage better? Yes, because you can relate with the personality.
You can see the traits, although it's always easy to call them out to someone else that is yourself.
A couple.
Hi.
Hi.
I think my point is just building on something you mentioned a few moments ago about getting the best out of introverts in meetings. So I think one thing I found really useful is offering people alternative ways to contribute. So having like online whiteboard sessions or something like that, where people can just drop ideas into post-it notes or however you want to manage it really. And then throughout the meeting you keep that open, people have time to think, process, contribute that way as well, so they don't necessarily have to compete for their time.
Yes.
Lots of people talking.
Yes. Definitely, that helps. Thanks for sharing. I think we have one more person at the back.
So over the years, develop a strategy that I use, especially when I have a manager that is not that doesn't have a knowledge about introverts, that's not enlightened. So as in peradventure, I'm put on the spot. So what I do is that I find allies, as in the this person here, and I say, oh, I agree with that idea. Obviously, okay. So what have we thought of this? So it's just dropping, changing the course of discussion, kind of, without doing much of it.
That's a good one. Anything else? I just wanted to add to what you said as well. For me, when I'm called out in meetings, I usually would just say, oh, can I get back to you on that? I want to take some time to go through what we've discussed and I'll get back to you on that. So as introverts, don't be afraid to just speak up and let them know that you need time to think. That's always worked for me as well. Okay, Thank you everyone for coming to my talk. I really appreciate it.